Today on Fair Folk at Work, my guest is somebody who is an owner operator at one of the most iconic game booths out there. She was an actress, and if you ever saw a lady dancing with a 3-foot canvas fish, you would recognize her. And later in her life, she was fortunate enough to work with a man she considered a god. I'm talking, of course, about Saw Winfield, aka Saw Thomson.
Hey, Dan, how's it going?
It's going great. I'd like to start out this interview by doing something I've never done before. I'm going to turn back time. Insert harp music here.
Ring, ring, ring,
Good
ring.
job. And I want you to place yourself in the space you are at the morning that you went to fair for the first time. Who were you?
Well, the very first time I went to the fair, I didn't work it. I just went. When I was about 13 years old, my mom and my sister and I went on a road trip up to San Francisco, and we stayed with friends in Marin. And they said, "Oh, you should go to the Renaissance Fair." And I'm like, okay. So we did. And I was like, of course, blown away and thought it was an amazing thing. And then the next year, I saw an ad in the LA Times for the Renaissance Fair here. I didn't know we had one here. I was 14. I'm like, I want to go. I want to go. And I bought a Forever Pass, right? Without even having any way. I didn't drive. I was 14 years old. I knew that my friend Shannon Wade, her parents owned the archery range. So I said, hey, can I hitch a ride out there with you? And they're like, oh, sure. And then her dad said, well, do you want to just work for us? Because, you can come out every weekend and you can just work and we'll feed you and we'll take, whatever, we'll take care of you. They didn't pay people and let us, be free range teenagers at the fair. And I'm like, yeah. And I think my Forever Pass might have cost all of $15. I knew it was, I think the fair cost $3.50 to get in. That's how old we are.
What are those first fair experiences that sort of spoke to you as a place to hang out for the rest of your life?
It was a magical place, and it was just the sights and the smells, and it was just like such an unusual place. No, I never had been to anything like that.
Did
And
Mr. Wade give you any advice on things to do or say at fair?
well, actually, technically, it was Averbach was their stepdad. So Robert Averbach. There wasn't a lot of real guidance. We didn't even really have to go through a costume approval process back then. It was just like, say thee and thou and huzzah and my lord, my lady. That's kind of all we really were taught to do.
And so you worked at the archery booth first?
Worked at the archery range for 2 fairs in 1977. I remember it because it was the same year Star Wars came out. The second year I did the fair, I was still working the archery range, but that was the year that I met Kevin Emery at the off-site workshops that they used to do. And there was a workshop for costuming that they did at Home Silk Shops, which don't exist anymore. And it was just a fabric shop, and they did this huge promotion for costume, and they had patterns, and Phyllis was there, I remember, and whoever was running costumes, and they did this workshop in this fabric store. And Kevin was there, and Shannon and I were there together, and we both looked at Kevin and said, wow, he's cute, because he was. And we became fast friends after that. And the next year, we were all talking about doing the fair. And he said, well, I have this idea about this water. I want to get people wet because it's hot. I have this water game that I want to do, but I don't have any money. And he asked me, I'm like, well, I don't have any money. But my mom was like, I'll back you guys. I like this idea. And at the time, She loaned us $500, which covered a lot of our costs, which is shocking to think. Because years later, it costs a lot more than that to build a booth and to all this stuff that you had to do.
Who designed the basic look and how the booth worked?
Well, Kevin and his friend Neil Quick came up with the idea of the buckets, and that's all they had was like, okay, we're gonna just have the buckets suspended over people's heads, and we're gonna have these targets that you're gonna throw the beanbags at. But we didn't really have an idea how to fill the buckets, or how to protect the people who were where they would stand. We had nothing, so we had to really sort of come up with this idea. And then it just was like, well, we need to be up high, so we built this tall thing. And back then, the bucket arm swiveled over to the booth, and we would just pour a bucket of water in it, and they swiveled it back and hooked it all up. It did not work. It was an unmitigated disaster. We would be open for like 2 hours, and that was it, because we ran out of water in about 2 hours, because we only had a 250-gallon wine vat that I borrowed from a neighbor who lived down the street. It was like what you'd make a hot tub in the 70s. The buckets wouldn't stay up. They would dump out all the time. It was a mess.
I would like to say, for those of you who have no idea what the booth looked like, it was a Rube Goldberg kind of collection of things that kind of worked and kind of didn't. And people would cheer when it worked. And then you would have to reset it after every time it sort of worked. And that was fascinating. And it was like built every year, right? So it had
Yes.
it had this nice sort of improvisational gestalt to it that really fit in with everything else in the fair. I mean, it really did look like if somebody had visualized dueling buckets in Elizabethan England, it would have looked something like this.
I say it looks kind of like a gallows. Yeah, it was kind of like a raised stage where, that's where the filling of the buckets happened. And definitely there was some sort of execution going on.
Well, there was a certain tension about what was about to happen next.
Oh, absolutely.
Either somebody was going to get wet or the whole thing was going to collapse.
Well, we tried to keep it from collapsing as often as possible.
Well, as someone who often hung out there, I appreciated the care that was hidden from the patrons as they walked down the street.
My husband, Jess, he worked for Disney for many years. And while he was working there, they had employee night for Christmas. And you could volunteer to work a ride if you wanted to, because it was sort of give the park people the day off and let the people who work at the studio getting people on rides or whatever. And he chose Pirates of the Caribbean, and they gave him a backstage tour of the ride. And he's like, oh my God, this smells like Dueling Buckets because it's so wet. He was like, it was always muddy and wet and moldy. It's so romantic.
Well, I guess you guys set the standard.
Yeah. And it was a show. It really was a show. In addition to helping people stay cool during the day when it was hot, people would come just to watch the show.
How old were you when you started?
I was trying to remember this the other night. I was 17 when we first did Dueling Buckets.
Perhaps in contradistinction to Disneyland, there are not a lot of 17-year-olds in charge of booths or rides at Disneyland.
No, it's true.
But you at 17 were given sort of the opportunity or responsibility of, you want to do it, fine, just go ahead and do it. And
that was one reason my mom was encouraging me to do it, because she was always about responsibility and teaching me responsibility, but letting me have fun with it. So my childhood had a lot of that. doing this was not as an unusual occurrence as one might think. And I think she was quite proud of our little business that we didn't make a nickel, but I think we did pay her back. I think we made at least the $500 to pay her back.
What other ventures of you did she back or support?
Well, like every little girl, I wanted a pony. And she said, okay, you're going to get a pony, but you're going to take care of it. And I was 11 years old.
Mhm.
And we got a pony, a little Shetland pony for $100. But a friend of mine, we shared it, which didn't turn out to work out well. And after a month, it was like, yeah, she needs to get a pony. I have my pony. We'll have our own ponies. And so we did. And then I had that pony for a little while. And then
Did you keep your pony at the house in Hollywood Hills?
No, there is a stable, Sunset Ranch, that's up the end of Beechwood. And I took riding lessons there, and they had trail rides that I would go on. So I was familiar with horses and everything. It wasn't just like, mommy, I want a pony. It's like I knew how to ride.
What was your pony's name?
The first pony was named Cucumbers
Mhm.
because she was a little dapple gray and looked like a pickle to me. So I called her Cucumbers. And then I kind of outgrew that. That was a Shetland pony, and they're small. And I kind of outgrew it right fast. So another beautiful Welsh pony came to the stable, and my mom looked at that pony and went, I want you to have that pony. It's much bigger. They're sort of medium-sized horses. And he was a gorgeous, beautiful chestnut horse, and I named him Chester. And I had him for quite a while, and then I got a full-sized horse. So that was my thing. I was horsing around until I was about 15. I found the fair. That sort of changed my life a little. And in all honesty, I found boys. And once you find boys, you're like, I don't have time to ride a horsey anymore.
Another impression I had of Dueling Buckets, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong, was that Kevin took care of the front of the house. He was the rucka, come and give us money and we'll get you wet with water kind of person. And you were more, in modern terms, were HR, or the people person who kept that part of things going along. Is that accurate?
Relatively. I mean, I definitely was the one who made sure we had a crew, and when people said, hey, can I work for you? I'd be the one they came to, not really him very often. And just like with the archery range, we sort of did the same thing where we said, yeah, we'll pay for your passes, we'll feed you, and we just want you to work like 4 hours a day if you want. You can work all day if you want, whatever you want to do. And sometimes that worked out pretty well. Sometimes people would be like, oh, I don't feel like working today. And we'd have what we would call the skeleton crew, which sometimes was amusing because the Dance of the Dead people actually would come by, and we actually would have a skeleton crew.
Did you have a set spiel that you said to people to sort of clue them into this is both a theatrical experience and a work experience?
We didn't, which is kind of, because you were in every play I believe I was in at the fair, and I never had tread the boards ever until we did that first commedia. So I wasn't really a theatrical person, and I don't even know where it came from, but I mean, I guess it worked. Kevin had done high school theater, so he already had that going for him. So he had the in the front guy running the whole show and all that kind of MC quality. We didn't really tell people, by the way, you're on, but back then you had the workshops and you could go, and that was one thing you had to do in order to get your pass. So we'd say, go to the improv workshop, go to the singing one, go to the dance, go to the ones where you're going to be more theatrical. So in a way, sure, let's say yes then.
One of the things in doing these podcasts is that the fair gave a lot of responsibility for sort of enforcing its rules to a sort of lower level going up. It's not like it was Disneyland. There was a master script that everybody sort of adhered to. And you and Kevin were sort of placed in the position of saying, this is the fair way of doing things. And at the same time, you're like 17 or 18 years old and you're enforcing the rules of somebody else. How did that fit with you, or did you like doing that?
So first of all, I was probably younger than anybody who worked for us. Older. Well, I mean, I had some contemporaries because I had lots of friends in high school. I was in high school by the time Buckets was going full bore. I had Jane who wanted to come work for us and a whole bunch of people that I actually went to high school with. So I don't know. We were all just playing all the time. And I think nobody really thought of it as a lot of work. It was just like, if that's the answer to the question, I mean, you had to get the water in the bucket, but after that, it was just getting goofy and people really enjoyed it.
That's my general impression coming in from the outside. It really did have a feel of things moving along, but nobody being uptight about it.
We were very family. It was a
Yes.
real family. And even on Mother's Day, people would give me gifts. They say, "Oh, your mom, because you're taking care of us." We rigged up a makeshift kitchen and I would cook meal, breakfast on Sunday mornings and dinner on Saturday nights. It's just because for us, it was for saving money because food at the fair was never cheap. So it was easier for me to like make a big giant bucket of pasta. And we always had waffles because we had a generator. So we had an electric wok, an electric waffle maker, and a coffee maker. So we had all these electrical things. So it was very family, we'd have this, we called the back room the living room. We would go find old couches on the side of the road and chairs, and that would be our furniture for the season. And then we just dump it in the dumpster at the end of the fair. Yeah, we were family, I think, for the most part.
When somebody came up to you and said, I want to work at Dueling Buckets, did you have sort of internal list of, yes, they're going to be fine, or red flag, tell them to go work someplace else?
Ooh, gosh, I don't think so. I think probably anybody who said they wanted to work, and if we had we might have had a limited number of passes, but I don't even remember if that was the case.
I dimly remember, I think you had a limited number of passes.
Yeah, we had a lot though, because we'd tell the powers that be, hey, we need, 6 people to run the game. And so that means we need at least, a dozen people to work half days, but we could have, we'd like to have more like alternates on a jury, if you will. So I think we might have had like up to maybe 20 passes that we could. One side note, I actually worked for the Living History Center, and my first office job with them was being the assistant to the games coordinator, Katie Tiger. And I did that for a couple of years. And so, I had an in. If I needed to get more people, I could do it.
Before you worked for them, did you ever have any sources of conflict with the powers that be, or was it fairly benign?
Well, the coordinators changed over the years. And the first coordinator was Charlotte Patterson, no relation to Phyllis. And she knew Kevin from the Garden Theater Festival. Charlotte Patterson was the coordinator at the Garden Theater Festival where Kevin and Victor Greenberg met and worked. And so she also worked as the coordinator for games at the fair. And she told Kevin, this is sort of how Buckets came about. She's like, you need to do a booth at the Renaissance Fair and think of something, and so he did. And she was a dream. She was a doll. She was very sweet. I really don't know what happened to her the next year, but she was replaced. And so there were a couple, and there was one woman who was not very nice and I want to say it was during probably the years where they were cutting corners on all kinds of stuff, and we were having a hard time working with her, and I can't remember her name. I want to say Leonie was her last name, and I don't remember her first name. And then there was a There was a gentleman who was very nice, but I can't remember his bill something. They came and go. There were a lot of them. It was always like, okay, who's running games this year? By being a coordinator for especially that, it was kind of just like the person you went to saying, right, here I'm submitting, I need 20 gate passes. I need, you tell me what I need. When's my inspection? I'll do this, you do that. And he didn't have a lot of working with them until the fair started. And then they questioned, like, you're making a lot more money than we think, and we want a piece of it, that kind of thing. Like, well, you think we're making a lot of money because we got a lot of show, but and they did a thing one year where they audited all the booths and they had a person collecting money for an hour, and they based what you made in a day on that hour. And I told them, I'm like, straight up, I'm like, this is not going to give you an accurate idea of what kind of money we're making, because it could be 100 degrees at 1 p.m. and we make $100. This doesn't mean we're making $100 an hour, so
You're
things
not
like that.
making that at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly. And you're not making that when it's cold, which we know happened every now and again out there. So yeah, some of the coordinators were not so much fun. But Katie was wonderful. And she was working as the coordinator one year. And then the next year she asked me, she's like, would you like a job being my assistant? Because you're running this show, you're running buckets, you know what you're doing, you're fast on your feet, you want to work for me. And I was like, sure. And it was a great gig.
Was that your first sort of real job?
Oh yeah, well, it was definitely my first 9 to 5. Had to be at the office. Got to learn how. She had the very first K Pro computer. It was like the first portable computer, and she had dated the guy who invented it. So she taught me how to use really a word processor. Let's face it, that's all it was. There was no internet. And what was also great about working for her was, since we all worked at the fair, I could get Fridays and Mondays off. So I could get out there on Friday nights and not have to be at work on Monday mornings when we were, during the run of the fair. She's like, oh no, I don't want to work on Monday morning. Later, I can't remember why she didn't need me or something, but then Chris Zeta, who was in charge of costumes, needed
I
an
remember
assistant.
Chris, yes.
Yeah, and I worked for her as her secretary assistant, where I was just supposed to answer phones and troubleshoot, but I ended up working in the costume shop because I knew how to thread an overlock machine and I knew how to sew. And every time now and again they'd have an emergency and like, so can you come and do this? I'm like, yes, I'll do that. So I worked my way around that place.
Let's switch gears and talk about sort of you on the stage. When Mark and I were writing shows, one of the ideas was that you just looked at somebody and said, what are they good at? Like Greg Moore was God. And once Greg Moore was God, you really didn't have to do a lot or write a lot for Greg to do other than say, hi, I'm God. I made that. With you, it was somewhat different, because also when you're writing a show, you write sort of placeholder lines and you realize there should be something funny here, but you can't think of it at the moment. So you just insert whatever there. But you had sort of your own way. You weren't a recognizable type, but you were really good sort of at being you one stage bigger. And so we kind of write stuff and then just kind of stand back and look what you did with it.
Wow.
And that really kind of worked. For those of you who have never seen Sandy on stage, it was kind of like a Lucy Ball kind of energy.
That is the greatest compliment ever.
Oh, did you have a dance background of some sort?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That was my thing. I was going to be the a dancing star on Broadway. That never happened. And I'd never acted. I In high school we did Godspell, and there were 27 people in it. Which, if you're familiar with the play, it doesn't have 27 people in it. And I was a principal dancer, but you had to audition, you had to do a monologue, and you had to sing a song. And I can't tell you how dreadful my monologue was. My singing wasn't great, but I did it enough to make it into the chorus, so I really was terrified. I'm a little bit dyslexic, so reading, a script is not easy for me, and I've always had I was petrified ever, when you're in class and it's like you have to read aloud. I was terrible at it, and I hated it, and I was like, I'm never gonna do this. And then Adam, who was my boyfriend at the time. I don't know how you guys hooked up to do the Commedia. I don't remember how any of that happened, but I just know he's like, "Oh, well, you're gonna play Isabella." And I'm like, I don't act. He's like, "Oh, you'll be fine." I don't know how to do it. And he's like, "We'll rehearse. You'll be fine."
It seemed completely natural that you were in it when you were presented to us. And Mark at one point said she has sort of this friendly yet a little distant attitude, and we recognize it. And like your fishy dance was basically all you. I don't recall anybody like choreographing it and
Oh.
saying 1, 2, flop a fish, 5, 6, flop it the other way. Or wait, I was the one who hit it into the wall. But anyway,
Yeah,
it
you
was a
were the
great.
one who broke the fish. You were the one Richard Beard would be mad at the end of every weekend with this torn up fish. I remember that. He was so mad at us for breaking that fish. I'm like, that's all Dan. Dan did that.
What was going through your mind as you were Sigfa or Isabella or
Well, I remember all our rehearsing out at the one stage that was there, and that was big fun. That was me learning whatever, how to be on stage. And then that first opening day, I was terrified. I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I think probably all y'all were like, yeah, you can. You'll be fine. I tell you, in the minute I hit that stage and I said something, I just went, oh, this is easy. And this is fun. And, the rest is history in that respect. But, well, I'd say Sigfa and Isabella aren't too different. They're both a little stupid. I always played sort of the dingbat.
but very good willing and very good natured.
Yes, I was very simple.
Yes.
Isabella was not very bright, nor was Sigfa. But she succeeded in getting the guy in the end. This is such a terrible feminist thing here. It's like,
But especially the Commedia, I have never put a show together like that, where it was just sort of, you two are in that scene, so you go figure it out, come back, and then everybody sort of critiqued it.
and definitely had the influences of the shows I'd seen at the fair, because I had been doing the fair for a couple of years before doing the show. So like I'd seen Commedia with Billy Scudder and Sandy Grin and those people.
You were
And
different from them,
oh yeah, no, we were different. And I'd seen obviously Pyramus and Thisbe multiple times with the very multiple casts that were, and so definitely had the influences from those people. So I knew what kind of, like, you got to give the people what they want. It was like, what the fair people want. They want a loud person, big as they can be on that stage, and it probably doesn't really matter what you're saying. you know
that's very true. Has there ever been a time in your life when you've used the confidence of having been on stage to do something that you were perhaps reluctant to do?
Mm. Reluctant. I don't know that I am reluctant to do much. I'll tell you what. I definitely, having done state Renaissance Fair shows, gives you a confidence to be kind of a brash, outspoken, if you will, and meeting new people. You put on your big act, if that's the answer to the question.
It does kinda.
Kind of like when, oh, I'm going to meet this celebrity. Oh, am I nervous? It's like, no, you have confidence. You can act like an idiot on a stage. You'll be fine meeting this celebrity.
I think that's it precisely.
Nowadays, I have my pottery business and I do the occasional craft fair where I'll have to talk to a lot of strangers and have to explain, and it's just definitely having that fair experience where you're talking to a stranger and you're saying the same spiel over and over and over again, and you get good at it. And so the fair definitely gave me that kind of an ease with the public.
And what you learn at fair, and I'm going to put this in words into your mouth and feel free to spit them back out. You learn to sort of listen to what their feedback, and you know what lines are kind of working and what's not working. And if something's not working, you know to switch gears to something they kind of want to hear. That is also a skill that is learned at fair.
Absolutely.
I am going to switch gears here once again.
Again.
Again, one of the first things I learned at Dueling Buckets was the expression, Todd is God. I wonder if you could, for those who weren't at the booth, who is Todd and why was he God?
Well, that's very funny. I'm like, was I really a Todd Rundgren fan then? I guess I was. Todd Rundgren, rock star, and bringing things around to where we were saying before, when you meet someone, well, I yes, I would say Todd is God, and then I got the opportunity to costume him and got to meet him. And when I met him, I was literally hemming something on my knees when I first met him. And so having that, this, I'm not afraid of celebrities. And we're talking about, this is like, was a big thing for me. It was crazy that, and now I'm not going to say we're friends, but I'm friends with his wife, and I made some clothes for her, and we actually went over to their house in Kauai just last spring and had dinner and a walk on the beach with Todd and his dogs. So
How did
yeah,
you come in contact with him in the first place?
good friend Hughes Hall was very good friends with the Robert Culp's children. One of them, Rachel, she makes most of Todd's outfits, and she doesn't really sew. Well, she didn't then, but she would embellish clothing. And she was talking to Hugh saying, I need a seamstress for something, making these costumes for Todd. And Hughes is like, oh, my friend Saw, she'll do that. He's a costumer. And then we became friends and we collaborated on a bunch of pieces. And the rest was history. I ended up going to Ohio. This show that we costumed, the only show there was in Ohio, in Akron. And I'm like, I got to see this show. So I went out and I show up there and they're like, do you think you could help us finish the costume? The stuff I had submitted was all done, but they had a whole bunch of other stuff that wasn't done. They're like, can you come to the hotel room in the morning and do some hemming and do some fittings? And I'm like, this show is tonight and you want me in the morning? That was costuming by firing squad. It was crazy.
Well, that's something you can learn at the fair, is that things are always happening at the last minute.
Exactly. It's like, okay, yeah, I could get this done. Yeah, you need this done by 6 o'clock tonight. Well, we're gonna work hard, and opening is at 6. So, it's like when we were doing the fair and we had to get the sump drained because we had a mud puddle. It's like, well, the fair is opening at 9 and we've got 2 hours to dig a trench and deal with this, and we would do it.
Now that we've talked for about an hour, What I'd like to do is go back to one of the first things I said. And, you are at the morning of the first day you're going to fair. Can you visualize how would your life have turned out if you hadn't done fair?
I honestly don't know. I mean, when the Pattersons, when Ron died, I was like, I, if that man never existed and hadn't made the fair, I don't know what my life would have been like. I wouldn't have the friends I have. I wouldn't have the way I live. I mean, I was so young. I mean, I can't really imagine like what was I going to be when I grew up, because I hadn't even had that thought yet. I'm going to be a dancer on stage, but my body betrayed me and turned me into a short stocky girl where I wasn't, tall and skinny. I wanted to be a Olympic horse jumper, but that was never going to happen. Honestly, I'd say the fair kind of made my life, and I don't know I don't know what I would be like.
Can you think of any personality traits, skills that you have now primarily because you did fair?
Well, sure. Like we said, being able to talk to the public, being gregarious, being creative, doing what you want to do, and run the flag up the flagpole and see who salutes it, kind of thing. It was like, well, I'm gonna let my freak flag fly, and that's what you're getting. It's really funny. I've met some people outside of my fair friends, who are like Lord of the Rings fans. And they're gregarious type as well. But it's always really interesting when we did like costuming things together, and we did Comic-Con and doing the masquerade, where you put on a little show. You don't do any speaking, but you put on a little show and you show your costumes. And those people were a little like, oh, we're going out on the big stage, and we have to. I'm like, it's easy. Yeah, just nobody knows you. Just go and be big and be this and be that. And I think it definitely caused us to win a few of our competitions, because we put on a really good 2-minute performance showing our costumes, but we still won the big prizes because I think we did a great show. And I feel that I was somehow instrumental in orchestrating the group more than, just walking out and turning around like, no, we got to do this, we got to do it. And getting those people to do that kind of thing wasn't easy, because they didn't have the experience that I've had from doing fair.
One thing also I think I have gotten from fair, and again, feel free to say I'm wrong, is the feeling that the audience, they want to have fun. And aside from the occasional guy who likes to heckle, they want to have fun and they want you to succeed. And if you give them half a reason to laugh or be entertained, they'll pick you up on that.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't they paid to get in, but they're not paying to sit on that hay bale for a half an hour to just sit there and watch somebody walk around. Like, if I'm going to sit down here and I want to see something that's good. I think most everybody who did shows at the fair, we all became really kind of amazing performers because of that fact that the audience could just get up and walk away at any time, and you couldn't be insulted by it.
Or there wasn't a parade.
Or there wasn't a parade, or the
behind you.
queen showing up unannounced.
And there's nothing you can do about the queen except say, God save the queen.
Yeah, God save the queen. Well, that's what you got to do.
Well, I think I'm kind of run out of words. Is there
Oh,
anything you would like to say, finish, conclude with?
Well, in your other, I think you asked who are your influencers.
Yes.
I would definitely list, well, Peg Long was the first queen I had. Peg, she was an amazing force to be reckoned with, a hysterically funny lady, and just really fun to improv with, and I didn't really know what improving was, but I remember her workshops were always super fun. And as far as the emulating the dumb girl, I kind of Chris Banks from Pyramus and Thisbe, I always thought was a fabulous actress and really sweet person and so funny on stage. And of course, you can't talk about the Renaissance Fair without mentioning Cock and Feathers. They're brilliant. Sandy Grin and Billy Barrett and Jeffrey Gluckson and then Mark Q. Ziebenthal. Definitely those people. And the cast of Pyramus and Thisbe in general. I mean, oh my God, Big Al and Greg Proops at the time. Now he's Greg Brown. Just hysterical people. And Kevin Brown, of course, who was a guiding force. And those people, sort of this core of the entertainment department, let you go. They let you have fun. Was what it was all about. I think there was a time there where it was Carol LaFleur who was the entertainment person, and people really did not care for her because she just like, no, you can't say that, you can't do this, you can't do this, that's out of period. And sure, being out of period is a problem, but you had to break period a few times because it was funny. And
Yes.
and other entertainment coordinators like Kevin Brown knew that. It was like, yeah, let them, you can use that line from that Marx Brothers movie because you know what, it's funny. In that respect, like those people, I think, formed the good core.
I remember a workshop that Kevin Brown gave, and it was one of the first years in DeVore. And he just went on about a 10-minute rant about how we were in the Inland Empire and there was no Inland Emperor. And he had just the most perfect amount of mock indignation about the Inland Empire not having an official emperor or empress. Well, I remember it to this day.
Aw, that's hilarious. Yeah, I didn't do DeVore. I didn't. I only worked Agora and Northern Fair because by the time they moved to DeVore, that was when the Reduced Shakespeare Company took off, and they took me with them. So
one of the few acts that have lived outside of the fair.
Quite a bit.
Yes.
And I've lived with them.
The worldwide phenomena.
It is a worldwide phenomenon. We have a hilarious story when they were doing a show at the Westwood Playhouse. This was a long time ago.
I think Mark and I once opened for you guys.
Oh, that maybe it was. It could have been the same show where I knew that Kent Elofsson was out in the lobby during the show because, of course, he'd seen it a million times. And this woman who worked there was popping her head in and out. And then she like looked at him during the show was on and she's like, they're just full of shtick. I believe she might have been Russian. They had just a bunch of shtick. I was like, yep, that's right.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with you on that.
Yeah, and that show has still got a whole bunch of legs. It's got new ones. It's got new legs right now. It's been revised and reformed and all kinds of fun things. So,
well, like I said 2 or 3 times, I've run out of words, but this time I might mean it. So anything else, or should I push the end button?
No, I think you got a lot of information out of me.
Well, and I was tremendously entertained, and it was fun. Well, we'll stop this recording, this one here. That was my December 2022 interview with Thomson / Winfield. Questions, comments about this interview? Please contact me at djng@earthlink.net. If you or somebody you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, please contact me at djng@earthlink.net. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.